Micaela Mantegna, thank you for being with us in this third event of the XR Safety Week, day one. Um, and yeah, first of all, just a quick note, because probably many of you read that this was a panel, and yeah, until a few minutes ago, it was supposed to be a panel, but unfortunately, Fabio Viola, who is a game designer, a game creator, and also a person who's working on the gamification in other different industries such as museums or tourism, is not able to connect because he's traveling and he's having some connection issues. But we'll try to recover this during the week. Anyway, it's a great pleasure to have you here, Micaela. And so I would start with a really simple question, but I would start with your name, your public name, Abogamer, because I think it's a mashup of two words, abogado and gamer, since you are Argentinian. And so I try to get this joke, but yeah, let's try to dig deeper into this. Why this name, first of all?
Well, thank you so much for the invitation, and hi to everyone that's here. I will try to keep up the conversation. And I'm sorry that Fabio could be here with us. Talking about what does it mean to be an Avogamer. I used to be this kind of very formal lawyer, but I always have loved secretly video games. I have been a gamer for all my life. And so this is kind of more on a personal note, but after a personal crisis, I decided to mix this kind of my passion and my research and what I was doing. And hence I became this kind of video game lawyer. At first it was not easy because a lot of the prejudice that are tied up to video games were translated to me and as a professional. I want to know, how many gamers do we have in the room now? Hands up.
I mean,
Gamers,
professional
hey.
gamers or
Gamers over here. Yeah, amazing. I always tell and a gamer here, hey, over there in the balcony. I will try to make this kind of fun and conversational, not more like a panel, since this kind of feels like more a conversation. And
yeah,
one of the things
100%.
I say about video games is like they changed my life in so many ways. And after this kind of personal crisis that I had, I was a huge fan of Mass Effect. I don't know if anyone have played Mass Effect. No? Yeah, that's my Mass Effect people there. And it's a game that deals with future and space and intelligent races and artificial races. And the thing is that led me to start thinking about how artificial beings could be treated. And that led me to become interested in artificial intelligence ethics, which at that moment was kind of not as big as is that right now. I started doing research on 2015, 16 maybe. And I know that it might sound silly to a lot of people, but it was a video game that led me there. And now if we are kind of go forward to where we are now, a lot of people, and well, we are kind of communicating now in a very game-like style. Games have permeated our culture in so many ways. And this is particularly true after the pandemic, where people couldn't be together in real life. Let's put air quotes on that.
Yeah.
So bigger quotes on that. And games have become more pervasive in our society.
So before we jump to your profession, your professional aspects, but when you said that Mass Effect was a game that influenced you a lot, was it the first game you fell in love with, or you have a like long background of video games? Because, for instance, I've had video games imprinting when I was a little child. So if I must choose three names, I would say original SimCity, Commander Keen from 1991, and my favorite game of all times, that's Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, the text adventure from 1989. I was really a small child. But in your case, what was printing of your experience before Mass
Oh,
Effect?
those are great games. I'm a huge fan of graphic adventures, so Indiana Jones is a must on my list. I'm a huge
Yeah.
fan of Monkey Island, of course.
Whoa,
And
how could I forget
if
it?
I let's not forget about Monkey Island. And I'm telling my
Never.
age when talking about Monkey Island, but one of the first games that for me was kind of so amazing was Baldur's Gate, an RPG that was an
Whoa.
adventure. And it was kind of the first time that I feel kind of immersed in a game. But I remember as a child playing with my brother, like simple console games, Circus Charlie, and trying to fill up the voids on of the story with stories on my own. So for me, my personal story is very kind of near to video games. And also, people here, hi Kavya, nice to see you.
Oh,
Um,
welcome.
nice to see you. uh, Another thing that people might not know about me is, besides being a video game lawyer, I'm an activist of games and a gender activist. I'm the founder of Women in Games Argentina. It's a collective working towards a more diverse industry, more diverse video game industry. And this is kind of tied up with my childhood and games, because one of the things I remember is that I wasn't able to play as something that truly represents me. Because one fantastic thing that we are seeing is like everyone here has something that is expressing their personality. It might reflect who you are in, again, quotes, real life, or maybe truly something different. But that was not true about the games we play when we were younger. You have to conform and to have to play with what's given and what's particularly males. And that kind of it was very formative for me, because one of the things I remember the most about Monkey Island is having this amazing female protagonist. And
Mm-hmm.
this is kind of another thing that shaped me, my view on video games, because my emotional ties to these characters were stronger where I could identify with them. And that's why I kind of see the connections between what is happening in XR and what is going to happen in the metaverse, with this kind of the lessons that we must learn from video game activism, video game governance, because we have like this long time of things that have been happening in the video game sphere.
Yeah, also because it's interesting what you said regarding the representation and the gender representation, but in general, the representation, because back in the days, in the third person video games, the platforms, etc., probably it wasn't such a big deal, such a big issue. First of all, because it was the 90s, and secondarily, because you were not self-representing yourself. And now, clearly, everything has changed in terms of self-representation. But do you think that we are still on a path that needs to be completed? I mean, what's the situation today of gender representation in the, how could I say, uh, general purpose video games, the mainstream ones?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, because one of the things about video games is like video games are ways to tell stories, and those stories needs diverse protagonists, because if not, you are telling kind of the same thing about video games again, again, and again. And differently to another creative industries, video games provide an interactive way to communicate, not only with another players, but with a story that is being told. And when you go to the cinema, the story is on your eyes, and you don't have much of a say about that. But in video games, you can make choices. And I know that there is a lot of gamers in the room, but for those who aren't, one of the wonderful things about games is like big games are not just those big names as Fortnite or I don't know, Counter-Strike or World of Warcraft. You have like a lot of independent games that are creating these marvelous stories that are truly inclusive. And this is kind of, if you think about the cinema and the movies that are made in Hollywood, and you have these kind of AAA productions that are kind of risk averse and they're going to tell the same stories and the proven formulas to the public. And you also have this kind of independent cinema when you can hear voices that you cannot hear in other places.
Sure.
Kind of the same with video games. You have video games that are kind of artistic, video games that are exploratory, video games that are social. You can interact with a lot of people, and video games that are kind of a self-exploration, where you are trying just to uh, understand the game mechanics or trying to uncover a story. And the particular thing for me that sets video games apart from another mediums is that you can feel that story in a way that is very different. And that allows us to create a medium for empathy that is not possible in books or in movies. Because when you are taking the hard decisions, like in political games, like in games that make you think about war, about the experience of being an immigrant, those decisions stuck with yourself in another way. And that's why I think, like, and coming back to your question about representation, we have come a long way from those 80s games where you can play like 3 male characters or probably a toad, an animal, but never a woman, because apparently it was preferable to fill the void with some kind of non-anthropomorphic animals than women. And we have come a long way, not just talking about women, but about a gender spectrum where you can represent yourself with errors, with if you go to the industry, in the video game industry, if you went to the conferences in the 80s and 90s, you have this kind of booth babes that were kind of there for the male gaze.
Oh, yeah.
And that was kind of a thing about how video games were designed and thought about this is the public that is going to consume these video games. This has been changing, and we have like different voices, but the video game industry is still the industry. And this is something that you see a huge gap between players, because it's kind of there is kind of more like the same amount of female and male players. That's not true for developers, because you have like a 20% of women developing games and not other people. And that is dramatically smaller if you talk about non-binary folks, if you talk about another people in the spectrum. So there is a lot to do. And also, this is not going to happen in the big names, because they are maybe not going to take risks. But you have a lot of independent games, indie games, that allow you to try stories. Like one that I'm very fond of tells the story about you found a phone, and that phone, while you are trying to unlock that phone, you discover the story of a person that is transitioning. That allows you to feel their pain, their emotions, and their struggle in ways that no other medium can convey. So for me, that's kind of a very passionate and personal defense about video games. It is kind of like the good things about video games. But also you have like a lot to talk about toxicity, about the culture. It could be particularly toxic in esports. And my personal concerns, how this is going to translate into the metaverse and the virtual worlds and this experience. Because when we were talking about the metaverse, we are talking about this integration. First of all, as we were saying, like with caveat last time, we don't have like a single concept of the metaverse.
Of course.
I like the meme. I like the meme of Hermione Granger saying like it's not
Hmm.
Leviosa, it's Leviosa, and I say it's not metaverse, it's metaverses because there is a lot of concepts and philosophies behind that word. And my concern is how the experience that we already have about video games is going to translate into this, and how the experiences that we have and we are still having, the problems we are still having in social media are going to translate into this. And another of my backgrounds is on artificial intelligence ethics, and one of my enormous concerns is how and the role that generative artificial intelligence is going to play into this. So it's kind of a mix-up of elements.
Yeah, and of course, when we talk about artificial intelligence, we have a lot of discussions about the kind of input you can provide. But this brings us back to what you were saying before. So we are moving in a direction where in games or in virtual experiences, we have a more refined self-representation. There are spectrums of representation, but outside from it and going to the industry, there is still a lot of barriers. So I've heard so many different answers to this question, and I really like to collect them. In your opinion, where the issue starts? I mean, does it start in schools? So we don't have enough youngsters that move towards a development career, or is it more like strongly culture issue we still have even outside from the school world?
Oh, this is a fantastic question, and something that I also would like to hear what people think in the room, because one of the things I think is like, you have to think like video games are not a separate medium from tech, and you have like this digital gap on tech. That I remember, I'm a child of the 80s. In my country, in Argentina, I transitioned from this kind of no internet world into a kind of semi-connected world, and now this kind of fully digital internet is everywhere, in your devices, in your everything around you. And one of the things I see or appreciate about this is like, there was this gap in technology, that technology was not for women, the technology is for a certain kind of folks. And if you go back from that, it's like the prejudice about math and science being like male stuff, something that male and men do. So I think like we are kind of translating from one thing to another. It's like from math to tech and computing, from computing to internet to video games. And this is kind of accelerating and also multiplying this kind of discrimination, because when you are a child and you don't have access to a device to play or a device to learn, you are probably not going to make that a passion or a career. And this is something that I have observed within our community of women in games, that all of the girls and women of my age that are in the video game industry had early access to devices and consoles and computers to play with. And this is also a game of numbers, because when you go to university and you see yourself surrounded by male faces, it has a very intimidating effect on you. When you go to a video game conference and every speaker is male, it's going to have an effect on you. And this is something that is slowly changing. And it's true that video games are not all just a niche thing. And because this is another you were saying about education, and I love that you touched that point, because one of the prejudice towards video games is like, video games are a waste of time. Playing video games is not education. Playing video games is not going to provide you with something useful. And if you start to know more about video games, what you see is that, as we were talking, video games can make you more empathetic, can make you learn more about history and culture. You have like this saga of Assassin's Creed games that are kind of historical recreations, and a lot of kids learn about history about playing and geography playing those games. So for starters, it's like something about the access to technology and how science is perceived as something that is kind of a male-dominated field. At least I'm talking from my perspective and in my country.
Yeah, sure.
And the access to the devices, but also this kind of prejudice that games are only for leisure and games are only for entertainment. I don't know if anyone in the room have heard about a game that is called That Dragon Cancer. Anyone? Well, That Dragon Cancer is the experience, is the game that was created by parents that lose their child to cancer. And they kind of sublimated their experience into a game. And of course, it's not a game that you're going to play knowing that you're going to win. Absolutely, you know that the outcome of the game is that you're going to lose. And what you are doing with that is hardly can be called entertainment. So it goes back to think that video games are more just entertainment. Video games are an interactive way to narrate a story. And that kind of what we have to make people understand. And this is something that I talk to parents. And when I had my TED talk, one of the things that I wanted to translate to people is like, when I decided to become this video game lawyer, people thought that I was throwing my career through the window because video games were kind of something that teenagers play and what that video games have to do with law. And this is what you have to start to understand, that video games can be education, video games can be a career, video games can be a medium of expression, can be art, can be activism, can be whatever they want, because games are means to tell a story. And what are you going to tell in that story is up to you.
Definitely. So let's try to let's help us understand, because I'm starting to figure what's a video game lawyer, but let's try to describe how can I say a standard day in the life of a video game lawyer. Let's try to start from the morning and get to to the end of the day.
I'm not kind of a standard lawyer, so I'm going to describe what I do.
Yeah, of course. That's
because
what I'm interested in.
I kind of navigate this intersection of being an activist and being an academic and also do things professionally. But I think like the question should be maybe what video games have to do with law. Because if I told you what I do, it can be confusing because I do research on activism and I do research on more of an academic thing as well. But if you think about games, the first thing that we can think is like they are an intellectual property. So we are playing in this kind of digital world. And from there, the first law that we see or we can identify is intellectual property law. So if you want to become a video game lawyer, you have to have a background on that. And this is kind of one of the most things that you're going to use. That is kind of also my professional background. I have a master's on intellectual property law, particularly on copyright and artificial generative intelligence, aka if machines can be authors. That's kind of my thesis, my dissertation. And the thing is like, this is one thing. But as many of the room may know, when you are talking about games started as something that was offline and where you bought a game. And after you bought a game, you have to wait until the next game appear on the shelves. Maybe you play Tomb Raider, and then you finish the game, and then you have to wait until the next game. And how the industry has changed by the internet. So if we start thinking about that, we're going to kind of be able to trace which legal regulations are going to be on place. So at first, games were kind of more regulated by intellectual property law and the contracts in place, how you relate with video games. But when internet started to go in the middle of this, the video game industry started to change because the monetization of the video games changed. You bought a game, but between this game and this game, you have this gap of time because video game development is like a lengthy process, and where there's maybe years between one game and another. So, as an industry, what do we do to keep the public interested in our games, in our franchise? And when internet started to become more available, the monetization models started to change, and you have like DLCs, additional content, you have a season pass, and you have you created, and this is kind of our way into metaverse and the creation of more proto metaverses and virtual worlds. You have the ability to interact as a developer with your audience more more closely than when you just shipped your game and your game was sold on a market. So if we started to trace that, immediately we can think that when we are talking about internet, we are talking about data. And if we are talking about data, we are talking about that data protection laws. We have like two huge chunks of regulation here: intellectual property. We have data regulation. From there, you can think about everything, because creating a video game involves labor. So you have labor law, you have contracts, you have money laundering regulations, because a lot of games have digital currencies. So a video game lawyer has to be like a very niche, specialty between knowing laws, but also knowing the industry and knowing how games are produced and these interactions between these worlds. Because maybe you are a traditional lawyer, but you need to have like the background industry to understand how this law is going to mix and match with the actual process of creating a game. And one of the most interesting things for me about law currently, about law and video games, is what is going to happen with virtual items and virtual property. Because if you remember not so long, someone tried to raise a question about, okay, I'm owning, and again, there are I'm owning this this sword in the game, and someone has tricked me into install this sword. I think it was like a chapter, an episode of The Big Bang Theory, that were trying to recover a digital item, and they were mocked about that. And this is not true any longer, because again, this prejudice as video games being something childish, translated into not giving enough value to what's happening in the games. And now we are transitioning into fast forward to 2021, and we have virtual items that are being sold in millions and millions of dollars. So it's not longer an issue that could be kind of swept under the rug anymore. And we have to start figuring out, how do we relate with our digital items? Because one of the things, like when you own a book in the physical world, you have a right to resell that book. You can throw that book, you can gift that book, because there is something that is called legally the right of exhaustion. Let's call it for sale, because my Spanish tongue today is being particularly tricky. I'm sorry if I'm being a bit slow, but I'm having a bit of a fever today, so I'm not in the in the best of my days.
We feel you.
I'm happy that I could make it to be with you, but I'm sorry that I'm not on my usual speed and mental speed. But the thing is, like, you have the rise of exhaustion and the first sale. So when you are talking about digital, when you are talking about physical items, you can do a lot of things with them that you cannot do with digital items, because for long and this is still debated, the first sale principle is not quite applicable to digital items. And even if we get this discussion in the eyes of the courts about what were we going to do with digital items, the thing is, like, even before that, you have like a lot of terms of service and terms and conditions and licenses that are saying and making this structure of how do you relate to those items, digital items. And this is not true only for video games, but maybe you remember some years ago, it was kind of a very, very interesting case, but someone bought a copy of, I think it was 1984 on a platform. It was an ebook, and she committed some Byzantine terms of condition violation, and the book was taken away from her Kindle,
from a device
remotely. Yeah, from her device. So the relationship that we have with our physical goods is legally different from the one that we have with our digital goods. And there is kind of another layer of regulation that would depend from country to country, but we need to start talking more about consumer law, because when we are talking about this kind of relationship between us and the producers of these items, we are sometimes immersed in a relation as consumers. So we have like data protection regulation, we have intellectual property law, but also consumer law that for me is going to play a major role in years to come to balance the huge growth and influence that now is having intellectual property law and contracts and how we relate to our digital items.
Let me add something, because you talked about physical goods and you talked about digital goods, but in the era of constant reality capture that we are living in, when we talk about the XR domain, we have also these trans reality goods, such as data, such as everything that's tracked from the devices we are wearing in our room, our surroundings, whether we have cats, just as you said, or we have some music poster or anything else. So I think that we are not completely settled on these, also because every generation of device has some different data that's tracked, some different grade of tracking. How do you think this is gonna impact the profession of a lawyer in the next years in terms of who owns what?
Wow, if I could answer that,
Sorry?
I would probably get hired by a very Fortune 100 company. But it's a tricky question, because if you think about data, you have these regulations in place that are shifting from country to country, because regulations are even when you have like some regulations and frameworks that are globally homogeneous, like international human rights, there are another frameworks that are maybe different from country to country. And we are talking about data. The thing is, like, you have to make data flow for digital business to succeed from one country to another. So that's why we are seeing this shift in regulations and trying to, not only because regulators are trying to protect privacy, but I'm also thinking that who controls the data is like controlling, as everyone says, the new oil from the digital economy. Because if you control data, you're able to control the markets and the fuel that is kind of fueling the artificial intelligence systems. So for me, is tricky because you have to find this right balance between data being able to create and facilitate innovation, but at the same time protecting our rights in the virtual worlds. Because there was something you were saying about how the devices are capturing our movements, my cats, my environment, my tastes, my desires. One of the things for me is very concerning, and we were talking with Kavya last talk, is like when you combine virtual worlds with and tracking devices and haptic devices, then with generative artificial intelligence, the possibilities are endless. And because you can create something, I'm looking at her avatar and I love the purple of their glasses, and the system can capture that and can create a model of that similar to steps over there, so I can buy it. And they can know when you are in love, they can know when you are aroused, they can know where you are lying, maybe. But at the same time, one of the things about the systems is like we project into the technology a lot of, let's say, assumptions, because we think that technology is not going to fail. And this is something from the ethics of artificial intelligence. We think that technology is transparent, that technology is not biased, that technology is efficient and is not going to fail, and neutral. Yeah, that's something huge, because when you think, and this is something that I tell my students a lot. When you think about something that is called smart, you say smart glasses, smart anything. But let's say an elevator. You say, I'm going to put a smart elevator in my building, and you need to start to think smart for whom, because it's going to be more ecologically friendly. It's going to take people faster to their shops. It's going to make people wait less from going to one place to another. So in our interactions with digital devices and digital devices that have automation and smart capabilities, one of the things that is obscure is smart for whom? Who are these masters of these technologies? And we are sold on this idea that everything that is smart is going to be free from error. And this is so far removed from true, because we are now seeing the devastating effects that automation is having on discrimination, that is having on bias, that is having on representation. And one personal layer that I would add is how this is going to play with the concept of post-truth. When we are thinking about a lot of people that is far removed from reality and kind of thinking about these wild conspiracy theories, and we can read that and think that how can anyone believe this? But we are seeing that there is a political divide created by that. So how this is going to be in a place where you can create a reality? How this people is going to interact with each other, and how it's going to impact their mental process and their mental health, the thing to be in a virtual environment, this validating their fantasies. And another thing, and it's not the least, and we are talking about as if everyone can connect to internet and everyone can access to a device and everyone has access to internet. A recent UN study says that 1/3 of the population of the world has not ever connected to the internet. So we are creating these virtual worlds, these virtual wonders, but at the same time, we are not discussing the impact that this technology is having on our environment And at the same time, we have 1/3 of the people that is being left behind. And this is not the future I want to live in.
So you were concerned that 1 hour could be too much, and I told you, don't worry, this will not be too much. But I would have like 1,000 questions more, but I'd like to ask to our wonderful audience if somebody of them has some questions for you. What do you think?
Sorry, maybe
Good
it's
for you?
internet connection, but I.
Okay. I was just saying, before jumping to the next question, I would like to ask to our audience if they have anything to ask you, since I saw some movement before. So anyone who wants to ask a question to Micaela Mantegna, please raise your hand, or if you are on the PC, make some sign with your emoticon with your emojis. Gabi, of course.
Hi, Micaela. Can you hear me?
No, come on stage.
You can still
Yeah?
stay on stage. I can.
Okay, because I was not hearing you. I feel weird to be on stage, so sorry. It's like I want to be here with you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I get on stage and we can talk here. That's okay.
But
Yeah,
if you
or
prefer me to
okay.
go on stage, I will. But yeah.
Yeah, and we're recording.
Yeah, just because otherwise it's more difficult to hear
Okay, got it. But it for me is weird, and I prefer to be with the people. So
you.
sorry,
Yeah,
sorry for
it's super weird. Super
misbehaving.
weird for me too. It's just a technical reason. Please carry on.
Yeah. So I am so glad that you're like I've been muted. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I'm so glad that you're looking into these laws. And actually, at XRSI, we are also advising UCC, and you'll see one of our community partners, is.
Yeah, I'm doing it.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm having trouble to hear you. Maybe it's my internet connection.
No. I set her on. She should be set up now.
Okay, am I good to talk?
You're a little
Okay,
far from
try
your
now.
microphone. Kavya, you need
No,
to
no.
speak a little.
Try now. Try now.
How about now?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, great. So yeah, at XRSI, we're advising UCC and Unidraw. That's one of the community partners for this event for the very reasons because the laws are changing, and so the laws are changing, and then there is the virtual goods and virtual assets, and you talked about the gaming, and I dealt with those laws at Second Life. We had to confront these realities, the microtransactions, and who owns the virtual goods. So like what advice would you give to people who are currently engaging with these virtual assets, but the laws are still kind of wishy-washy, and they're not quite understanding that something maybe, and that's why a lot of people are just buying stuff, but they're not familiar with what the legal implications are. What can I do today as I'm like, I'm an enthusiast, but I don't understand the intricacies of legalities. What should I do as a normal, virtual citizen to engage with virtual goods and to buy these things? What should we take care of in terms of that?
Oh, this is such a great question. Thank you for asking this because it circles back that living in a virtual world uh, doesn't exempt us from being educated citizens. As you were saying, we are digital citizens and we need to be educated digital citizens because we need to be aware that this is still things that are moving forward in terms of legality and on digital assets. And you need to be aware of scams. And there is kind of this huge, and this is kind of like a huge separate topic to talk about NFTs and the underlying rights to the images and the content that is on the NFTs. So for me, it's precaution because there is a lot of excitement, there is a lot of hype, there is a lot of, and this is something I blame the media on because there is a lot of news lines talking about everyone is getting rich in the metaverse, this person has become a millionaire, but by selling NFTs, so you can do it. And this is also something that, as millennials, hit us very close because you need this kind of individual, you have this individual responsibility to become a successful person. And there is this kind of social pressure to become successful. There is kind of these headlines that are telling, hey, you are losing if you are not investing in NFTs and virtual items. At the same time, there are a lot of people that is doing very serious work about art. And this is a very interesting thing because we are creating artificial scarcity in a medium that is fully replicable, because digital has this beautiful thing that you can replicate anything with kind of a zero marginal cost, because we are talking about bits and bytes at some fundamental level. At the same time, you are trying to create an economy. So there are a lot of considerations that you have to take into place. So as an individual, you should be educated on how you spend your money and the legal implications of that, because I see a lot of people that are saying, I bought this NFT, and someone is kind of just doing right click and copying it. Sorry. The thing is, like, if we there is a push to reform like copyright law to protect our, I saw a movement that was trying to prevent the right click to exist in the internet because intellectual property issues. And we are going to end up creating, going to restrict expression. So we have to be very, very careful, and we have to think the considerations in the long term, not just from one perspective. We have to be aware of the international digital rights community and their work on freedom of expression and content moderation, and not just privileging intellectual property interest. So it's kind of a balance. And so this is kind of on a collective level. Education in the individual level, not to be deceived. Education in a huge collective level to not create a world that is going to entrap us and our rights.
Amazing. So more research. And any timeline by which you think that these laws could become streamlined? Or, and I want to allow other people to ask questions as well. So I'll just move myself to the audience.
Yeah, and to quick answer on that, that is kind of not foreseeable, because the process of regulation, and particularly when you're talking like the regulation, the change of copyright law in Europe, and the last one took like years in the making. And when you are trying to reshape the law, you have not only to capture, and it's your technically you have not to only capture what is happening now, but you have to foresee what is going to happen. So any reform process has to be really, really slow and careful because of that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Micaela. And I'll let others ask the questions.
Okay, thank you. Okay, any question? April, maybe?
You can also ask about Mass Effect. I'm open to that.
Luis? No, I have a final question for you, but I will get back to it after another round. So, Luis? Yes? Yes? No? No question? Okay. So, yeah, there is something I was curious about, because we talked about the lawyer profession, we talked about games, and
Wait, hold on,
so
Marco.
yeah,
I think
sorry?
there might have been a question. I think there might have been a question. If there is a question, why don't you just come down to me here on the stage? Come down, because and I can ask for you if you come.
Or
to me. I can repeat it. Do you have a question?
no, I can amplify you. A second.
Yeah, do have a question if people can hear me.
Yeah, hold on one second. We're trying.
Yeah, what about now? Try again.
Go ahead.
People hear
Try.
me? Can people hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, I have a question about video games in immersive media. Specifically, you mentioned the Assassin's Creed games. They're beautiful games. I love the historical settings, but a lot of games like these are also involved in sort of like replications of graphic violence, kind of inherent in the nature of the plot.
Mm-hmm.
I Do you have any concerns about the idea of bringing that kind of gameplay element into inherently physical media like virtual reality?
Oh, that's an amazing question. Thank you for asking. Because, and again, this is the heritage of games, game design. We have been designing games to save the princess, to conquer the other fox, to murder our partners in a digital environment. But there is also another kind of more cooperative gaming that we need to explore. So this is kind of a really interesting question because we need to design and think about new game mechanics that doesn't involve necessarily violence or more like cooperation. And again, for me, the saving grace of the industry are the independent developers. I love video games so much, like I'm a huge true believer and passionate about them. But for me, the saving grace from the industry will come from independent games that are creating beautiful games that not always resort to violence. They are creating games where you have to cooperate with another player, because if you are not cooperating with that player, you're not going to succeed. And these mechanics are telling us a different story, and we need to bring this. But also, it's like the same thing that we criticize about another mediums, like the huge amount of movies that are made around violence and these kind of same tropes. So the answer, unfortunately, is like yes and no. I am aware of this, and I know that the industry needs to address this. At the same time, it's not that video games are inherently violent and that translates directly into create violent people, or this about addiction, that we are creating addiction to video games, but there is also true that we have some addictive elements that we need to address. But also we have this other huge field of possibilities to explore in games, where there is a beautiful game that's called Undertale, when you can go through the game without killing a single thing. And we need to, and this is kind of more of my personal purpose and mission, we need to give voice to these games. We need to talk about games that are telling us about political expression, like Beholder. Beholder tells you the story about what is to be a citizen in a totalitarian state. And you can use that. You can use Twitch to share these games to other people. One of my talks in the past, MOSFest and RightsCon, had to do with this: how to use video games as a tool for activism, and how to reach to this amazing community of gamers that are this untapped power for grassroots activism, and make them care about your cause. So I know this kind of is like a maybe answer, because you have like these nuances, but I wanted like to present the whole thing as I see it.
Amazing. So since we have just 5 minutes, one last question from the audience, or I will move to a final one. Here, 1 second. Wandering through. I just need to. Okay. To megaphone you.
Can you hear me now?
Okay.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, everybody.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, it's kind of carrying on from the last person's question. I guess I wouldn't say I'm concerned, but I am somewhat aware of, we know how VR, fully immersive VR experiences are stored in similar parts of the brain as actual experiences, which is why those are used in such effective ways to treat different mental health issues at the moment and being studying being studied so profoundly for whatever PTSD, depression, anxiety, all sorts of causes. So I guess my sort of thinking is, what effect do very immersive, say, first-person shooter games have as an effect on the brain? Because it's a completely different, the brain's putting these experiences into a very different place than playing a game on a desktop, for example. We're kind of entering into a whole new sort of paradigm. And personally, I agree. I mean, I love games that use different mechanics and that don't just play on sexuality or violence or whatever it is that seem to be the most popular games. But at the end of the day, there are going to be loads more games that are highly sexualized or highly violent that will be fully immersive. And I guess, yeah, that's just sort of carrying on from that is, do you foresee more risk involved in the way our brains consume this content in VR and how it affects them in the long run?
Absolutely. And I think that anything, when we are talking about immersive environments, anything is enhanced. And I want to provide something about this and think collectively something about this. There are games that are designed to be violent, but also it's the things that we as humans can do in games. We cannot say that Beat Saber is a game that is designed to be violent or be sexual. Yeah? But has anyone played the competitive mode of Beat Saber here? No? Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And please tell if someone has happened, this is something that has happened to you. But the first thing that I saw when I started to play this game, it was like other players trying to make like obscene gestures to me. And I was like, dude, we are kind of like 2 hands and a body. And you are kind of figuring out to create these shapes to emulate something that is harassing. And again, what you were saying about immersivity is a huge thing that we need more research on, that we need everyone on board to create different experiences. And from my perspective, one of the things I think is that, as you know, when someone goes like diving and need these decompression chambers between going to the deep dive and the surface, maybe start thinking about kind of mechanisms like that, and you are going back to reality and these layers of reality, because that's another concept that for me is worrying. We are talking about reality, but in reality is kind of becoming more of a spectrum when you are different stages from the real reality to these kind of virtual, fully immersive settings. So for me, it's like, again, education, again, research, and again, we are humans, and people is going to do that in games, is going to do that in life.
Yeah. So I don't know if there is any more question. Thank you, Wondering too. And okay, so one last consideration, getting back to what we were discussing before in terms of understanding intellectual property, understanding all these kind of layers. Do you think that gamification can play a role in this, like making things more appealing, more compelling, and in a way teaching us how to deal with intellectual property and with our data?
I think this would be a really good question for Fabio, because I'm not an expert on gamification. But one of the things I can say from my legal perspective, and I was like thrilled last year to see teenagers engaged like in super informed discussions about fair use, because they couldn't play the music that they want on Twitch. And the algorithms, they became interested in the algorithms of Twitch because they weren't able to play the songs. And then from that, really huge discussions of the nature of digital goods and how they interact with digital goods. And we are having this generation that has a different perception of how they relate to anything that is digital. And one of the things I talk when I go to classes with I give lectures on the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization. And one of the things I say is like, we need to figure out this common ground between what regulation and intellectual property is and has been for the past 100 years, and what is like the social consumption of the digital goods. Because now we are having a generation of fully digitally native people that doesn't want to relate to content in the same way, because content for them is something to be shared, to be viralized, and monetization comes from another source. So, and coming back from the question of gamification, it's like, I don't know if you can call that gamification, but at the same time, there's like games for me are permeating society and changing us for the good and for the bad.
Yeah, definitely. But we will talk about this in another occasion. For now, Micaela Mantegna, I really want to thank you, first of all, for being with us, even if you were not feeling well, even with all the obstacles we can imagine. But yeah, it's been a real amazing pleasure, and really, I can't wait to talk with you next time. So again, have a
I'm
great,
super
great
thankful
day.
for everyone to be here to listen about games, and also to be patient with my English. That is kind of a slippery slope when I'm with fever.
Well,
Bye, everyone.
I
Thank
don't
you.
know how many English native speakers are here, but we are used to cross borders. So yeah, this will never be an issue.
Gracias.
Grazie mille.
Grazie mille. Bye, everyone.